A 19-year-old boy stands on a bridge in Danzig, staring down at the dark water below, calculating whether the fall would kill him. His father has just died under mysterious circumstances. His inheritance is secure, but his future feels like a trap. He doesn't jump. Instead, Arthur Schopenhauer walks away from that bridge and spends the next 7 decades building a philosophy so dark, so unflinching, that it would make him the most hated thinker of his generation and one of the most influential minds in human history. February 22nd, 1788. The city of Danzig, a wealthy trading port on the Baltic Sea, part of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, but culturally and economically German. The Schopenhauer family occupied the highest tier of merchant aristocracy. They weren't nobility by blood, but their wealth and influence rivaled any count or baron in the region. Heinrich Floris Schopenhauer, Arthur's father, embodied everything the Enlightenment merchant class aspired to be. Cultured, widely read, fluent in multiple languages, a man who quoted Voltaire at dinner and kept meticulous account books in his study. He'd built the family fortune through the grain trade, shipping Baltic wheat to markets across Europe. The money was substantial. The Schopenhauers lived in a mansion on the Heiliger Geistgasse, Holy Ghost Street, with servants, fine furniture, and a library that would make most universities envious. Heinrich was also severe, controlling, and increasingly unstable. He demanded absolute obedience from his household. His temper was legendary among business associates. He trusted no one completely, kept secrets even from his wife, and suffered from what we'd now recognise as paranoid episodes. But in 1788, he was still the master of his domain, and when his son was born that winter, he already had plans for the boy's future. Johanna Henrietta Trosina, Arthur's mother, was 17 years younger than her husband. She'd married Heinrich at 19, a strategic match arranged between merchant families. Beautiful, intelligent, and ambitious, Johanna found herself trapped in a loveless marriage to a man who valued control over affection. She longed for intellectual stimulation, for artistic circles, for something beyond account ledgers and shipping manifests. The marriage was cold. Heinrich and Johanna maintained appearances in public, but lived essentially separate lives within their mansion. She sought warmth elsewhere, not through affairs, at least not yet, but through books, through correspondence with writers and thinkers, through dreams of a different existence. Into this frozen household, Arthur was born. His arrival did nothing to thaw his parents' relationship. Heinrich saw his son as an heir, a successor to the business empire. Johanna saw him as another obligation in a life already thick with them. The name Arthur was carefully chosen. Heinrich wanted a name that would work in any European language, a name for international commerce. Not German Johann or French Jean, but Arthur, pronounceable from London to St. Petersburg. Even the boy's name was a business decision. Arthur's earliest memories would be of his father's study, that dark wood-panelled room where Heinrich conducted business with cold efficiency. The boy learned early that displays of emotion were weakness. That sentiment was for women and fools, that the world was a brutal competition where only the calculating survived. He also learned that his mother found him tedious. Johanna made little effort to hide her lack of maternal warmth. She was dutiful but distant, going through the motions of child-rearing while her mind wandered to the literary salons she'd never attend, the conversations she'd never have. Then in 1793, when Arthur was 5, the world fractured. Prussia and Russia carved up Poland in the Second Partition. Danzig, that proud free city, was absorbed into the Kingdom of Prussia. For the Schopenhauer family, this was catastrophe. Heinrich had built his entire operation on Danzig's status as a free trading port, exempt from the heavy tariffs and restrictions of the great powers. Prussian annexation meant new taxes, new regulations, new competitors with government connections. Heinrich watched his carefully constructed empire begin to crack. He made a decision that would shape his son's entire life. The family would leave Danzig, They would move to Hamburg, another great trading city, still free, still independent. But there was a condition, a bargain Heinrich struck with 5-year-old Arthur. The boy could choose. Remain in Danzig, pursue an education in languages and literature, perhaps become a scholar, or come to Hamburg, commit to the merchant life, inherit the business empire. Heinrich made the stakes clear. Choose scholarship and you choose poverty. Choose commerce and you choose wealth. What kind of father presents this ultimatum to a 5-year-old? Arthur chose Hamburg. He chose his father's path. Whether he truly understood what he was surrendering or simply sensed what answer was expected, we'll never know. But the decision haunted him for decades. The family relocated in 1793. Hamburg was larger than Danzig, more cosmopolitan, its harbour thick with ships from every nation. The Schopenhauers established themselves quickly. Heinrich's business, acumen and capital bought them entry into Hamburg's merchant elite. They moved into a house on the Neue Wandraum, overlooking the canals where goods flowed in from the North Sea. Arthur's education began in earnest. Not the classical education he might have received. No Greek or Latin. No philosophy or poetry. Instead, practical training. Modern languages, mathematics, bookkeeping, commercial correspondence. Everything a merchant needed, nothing a thinker wanted. Heinrich hired tutors, but also believed in direct experience. When Arthur was 9, his father sent him to live with a business associate's family in Le Havre, France. For 2 years, Arthur lived in a foreign country, attending French schools, learning the language, absorbing the culture. It was educational, but also isolating. A German boy alone in France, separated from his family, learning to navigate a world where he always felt foreign. He returned to Hamburg in 1799, now 11, fluent in French but even more withdrawn than before. His father immediately began the next phase of preparation. Arthur accompanied Heinrich on business trips, sat in on negotiations, learned the rhythms of international trade. Something was breaking inside the boy. The journals he'd later keep, the philosophical fragments, trace back to these years. A growing sense that the world his father inhabited, this realm of buying and selling, of profit margins and market shares, was fundamentally empty. But he'd made his choice. At 5 years old, the path was set. Then in 1803, Heinrich made an unusual offer, a grand tour of Europe, months of travel through the great cities and cultural centres, but with the same condition as before. Commit definitively to the merchant career or forfeit everything. Arthur was 15, he agreed. What followed was one of the strangest educational journeys in the history of philosophy. For nearly 2 years, the Schopenhauer family travelled. They went to Holland, where Arthur saw the great trading houses of Amsterdam, to England, where London's scale and industrial power overwhelmed him, to France, revisiting the scenes of his childhood exile, to Switzerland, Austria, and finally south into Italy. Heinrich maintained his commercial network, conducted business in every city. Johanna indulged her cultural aspirations, visiting galleries and attending salons. Arthur kept a meticulous travel diary, recording everything he saw with a precision that revealed both his training and his temperament. But what he recorded wasn't wonder, it was horror. In London, he saw the factories, the slums, the casual cruelty of industrial capitalism. Workers ground down to nothing, children labouring in conditions that would kill them by 30. In Toulon, France, he watched galley slaves, men chained to oars, beaten and starved. The image never left him. The grand tour that should have completed his commercial education instead planted the seeds of his philosophy. Everywhere Arthur looked, he saw suffering, not as an aberration, but as the fundamental condition of existence. The world wasn't a marketplace of opportunity, it was a slaughterhouse. They returned to Hamburg in 1804. Arthur was 16 and the bargain was due. He entered a commercial apprenticeship, working for a senator's trading house. His days filled with invoices and inventory, correspondence and contracts. He hated every moment, but he'd given his word. Then on April 20th, 1805, Heinrich Floris Schopenhauer died. The official cause was drowning. He fell from a warehouse loft into the canal below. An accident, the authorities concluded, but whispers circulated immediately. Heinrich had been increasingly erratic in his final months, paranoid, speaking of enemies, of plots against him. Some said he jumped, others suggested he was pushed. The Schopenhauer family closed ranks, insisted it was a tragic accident, buried him quickly. Arthur was 17. He stood at his father's funeral, listening to eulogies praising Heinrich's business acumen and civic contributions, and felt nothing but confusion. Had his father killed himself? Had the pressures of commerce, the competitive brutality he'd taught his son to navigate, finally crushed him? The inheritance was substantial. Arthur was now wealthy, independently so. The condition that had bound him since age 5 dissolved with his father's death. He could choose again. For months, he remained in the apprenticeship, going through the motions, perhaps honouring his father's memory, or perhaps simply paralysed by uncertainty. But something had broken loose inside him. The path his father had laid out now looked like exactly what it might have been to Heinrich at the end. A trap. Johanna felt no such paralysis. With Heinrich dead, she was finally free. She took her inheritance, moved immediately to Weimar, the cultural capital of Germany, where Goethe held court and artists gathered. Within months, she'd established one of the most fashionable literary salons in the city. She was 47, and her real life was finally beginning. Arthur visited her in Weimar in late 1805. He watched his mother bloom in Heinrich's absence, saw her surrounded by admirers, hosting evenings of poetry and philosophical discussion. She'd transformed into the woman she'd always wanted to be, and she made clear that Arthur wasn't part of this new life. She found him gloomy, pedantic, too much like his father in temperament, despite his growing intellectual interests. When he suggested he might abandon commerce and pursue classical education, she was dismissive. Do what you want with your inheritance, but don't expect support or sympathy from me. It was the final severance. Arthur returned to Hamburg and made his decision. In 1807, at 19, he quit the apprenticeship. He enrolled in the gymnasium in Gotha to make up the classical education he'd missed: Greek, Latin, mathematics, history, philosophy. Everything his father had denied him, he now pursued with ferocious intensity. The other students were 15, 16 years old. Arthur was 19, starting over, surrounded by boys who'd never balanced a ledger or watched galley slaves die in French harbours. He didn't fit, he never would. But for the first time in his life, he was reading philosophy. He encountered Plato, the forms, the cave allegory, the vision of a reality beyond the material world. He discovered the Upanishads, Hindu and Buddhist texts that had recently been translated into Latin, describing existence as illusion, suffering as fundamental, enlightenment as the only escape. These ideas detonated in his mind. Everything he'd witnessed on the grand tour, every insight that had formed watching his father's world, suddenly had a framework. That the suffering wasn't incidental, it was the point. The world was exactly as terrible as it appeared. Arthur Schopenhauer had found his subject. Now he needed to build a philosophy that would explain why life was worth living, despite being, at its core, not worth living at all. The University of Göttingen accepted him in 1809. At 21, Arthur was finally where he'd always belonged, surrounded by books, lectures, the apparatus of serious thought. But he was also completely alone. His mother's salon in Weimar thrived without him. His sister Adele, 9 years younger, remained trapped in Johanna's orbit, becoming the dutiful daughter Arthur refused to be. He had money, independence, and a growing conviction that everything his professors were teaching was fundamentally wrong. The German universities in 1809 were drunk on idealism. Kant had died 5 years earlier, leaving behind a revolution in philosophy. His successors, Fichte, Schelling, and the rising star Hegel, were building elaborate systems claiming that reality itself was the product of mind, that consciousness creates the world, that history moves toward rational perfection through dialectical progress. The lecture halls buzzed with optimism. Reason would triumph, human nature would evolve. The absolute spirit was unfolding toward ultimate self-knowledge. Arthur sat in these lectures and felt his stomach turn. Had these men never left their studies? Had they never seen a slave market, a mental asylum, a father collapse from exhaustion? The world wasn't progressing toward anything. It was a horror show repeating itself with minor variations. Consciousness didn't create reality. Consciousness was trapped inside reality, forced to watch helplessly as the body aged, sickened, died. He found one professor who made sense. Gottlob Ernst Schulze taught a course on ancient skepticism and had written a devastating critique of Kant's epistemology. Schulze's message was simple. We can never know things as they are in themselves. We're locked inside our perceptions, experiencing only appearances, never reality. The wall between mind and world is permanent. This should have been paralyzing. For Arthur, it was liberating. If we can't know reality directly, then all these grand systems, all the idealist fantasies about mind-creating world, were just speculation. Philosophy needed to start over from what we actually experience, the raw data of consciousness itself. What do we actually know with certainty? Only one thing, that we suffer. Pain announces itself with absolute authority. You can doubt whether the external world exists. You can't doubt a toothache. Arthur began developing his system in notebooks, writing in a cramped hand that filled page after page. The foundation was Kant's distinction between phenomenon and noumenon, appearance and thing in itself. Kant said we can never know the thing in itself. Arthur disagreed. We have direct access to it in exactly one place, our own bodies. When you decide to raise your arm and your arm rises, what's happened? From outside, someone sees a physical event, a body part moving through space, but you experience it from inside. You know the act of will that preceded the movement. You have access to both sides of the equation, the appearance and the thing in itself. The thing in itself is will. Not rational will, not conscious choice. In the deliberative sense, something deeper. A blind striving, a constant wanting that drives the body without consulting you. Your heart beats, your lungs breathe, your stomach digests. None of this requires your permission. The will operates the machinery, and consciousness is just a passenger, narrating events after they've already been decided at a level far below awareness. This explained everything he'd observed. The galley slaves rowing because the body demands it. His father's collapse when the will finally exhausted itself. The beggar in Hamburg, whose body kept demanding life, despite having no reason to continue. We are not rational minds piloting bodies. We are bodies animated by will, and consciousness is the afterthought, the story we tell ourselves about why we're doing what we were always going to do anyway. But Arthur's insights went further. If my body is will appearing as phenomenon, what about other bodies? Animals clearly operate on the same principle. A dog doesn't deliberate about whether to chase a rabbit. The will moves through it directly. Plants grow toward light without thinking. Even rocks, in their way, exhibit the will's fundamental nature. They resist being broken, maintain their form, persist in existence. The entire universe, Arthur concluded, is will objectifying itself at different levels of complexity. Matter, life, consciousness, all of it is the same force manifesting in different forms. Schopenhauer was inverting the entire idealist tradition. Consciousness doesn't create the world creates consciousness as one of its strategies for willing more effectively. He moved to Berlin in 1811 to continue his studies and walked straight into the Hegel phenomenon. Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel had just been appointed to the chair of philosophy at the university. His lectures were packed. Students stood in the aisles. The system he was building claimed to explain everything, all of history, all of reality, as the progressive self-realization of absolute spirit. Arthur attended exactly one lecture. Hegel spoke in dense, abstract formulations, describing contradictions sublating themselves into higher syntheses, the rational becoming real and the real becoming rational. The audience was rapt. Arthur was repulsed. This was philosophy as word magic, concepts performing tricks with themselves, while the actual world of suffering and striving remained completely unaddressed. He never went back. Years later, he would call Hegel a charlatan, a clumsy fraud whose deliberately obscure writing concealed the absence of genuine thought. The hatred was mutual. Hegel's system dominated German philosophy for the next 30 years. Schopenhauer's work was ignored almost completely during his lifetime, dismissed as pessimistic ranting by a marginal crank. But Arthur was building something that would outlast all the dialectical gymnastics. In 1813, Napoleon's empire was collapsing. The German states rose in rebellion. The wars of liberation swept through Prussia. Berlin was chaos, students volunteering for militias, professors delivering patriotic speeches. Arthur fled. He had no interest in dying for anyone's idea of national destiny. Will manifests as war just as naturally as it manifests as individual striving. Different scale, same horror. He retreated to Rudolstadt, a quiet town where he could work without interruption. For the next 3 years he lived almost as a hermit, writing 10 to 12 hours a day. His mother never visited. She'd published her first novel and was enjoying literary celebrity. Adele wrote occasionally, sad letters describing life in Johanna's shadow. The manuscript grew. Arthur was attempting something no philosopher had tried before. Not a system of pure logic or a transcendental deduction, but a phenomenology of existence itself. Start with what we actually experience and trace it back to its source. We experience wanting, constantly. Hunger, thirst, sexual desire, ambition, the need for comfort, the fear of pain, the craving for pleasure. Even when satisfied momentarily, the wanting returns. Satisfaction is always temporary. The want is permanent. This is the will revealing its nature. It is endless striving without purpose or goal. You eat and become hungry again. You sleep and grow tired again. You achieve one ambition and immediately desire the next. The cycle never stops until death. And even then the will continues in other bodies, other forms. Most philosophy treats desire as something to be managed or fulfilled. Arthur saw it as the problem itself. The wanting is the suffering, not the lack of what we want, but the structure of wanting as such. Even getting what you desire doesn't end suffering. It just creates new desires or reveals the emptiness of the thing you thought would satisfy you. He turned to the Eastern texts he'd discovered years earlier. The Upanishads taught that the self is illusion, that individuality is the source of suffering, that enlightenment comes from recognizing the unity of all existence. Buddhism said, life is dukkha, unsatisfactoriness, and the path to liberation is extinguishing desire itself. These weren't mystical fantasies. They were describing the same metaphysical reality Arthur had discovered through systematic analysis. The will is one. It manifests as many individual beings who imagine themselves separate. This individuation is the source of conflict, competition, suffering. We fight each other because we don't recognize we're fighting ourselves. But the Eastern solution, renunciation and meditation, struck Arthur as incomplete. You can't simply stop willing. The body won't allow it. Even monks must eat. Even ascetics want enlightenment. The The will is too fundamental to be transcended through practice. Arthur's answer was more modest and more devastating. We can't escape the will, but we can achieve temporary relief through two means: art and compassion. Art works by shifting consciousness out of willing mode. When you're genuinely absorbed in music, painting, literature, you stop wanting. You become pure knowing, observing form without desire. The will is momentarily suspended. This is why art feels like redemption. For the duration of aesthetic experience, suffering ceases. Compassion works differently. When you recognize that another's suffering is identical to your own, that the boundaries between selves are illusions created by the will's need to individuate, you break through to the underlying unity. Compassion is seeing through the veil. It doesn't change the fact of suffering, but it transforms your relationship to it. Neither art nor compassion offers permanent escape. The will always returns. But they provide glimpses of what existence would be like if the will didn't dominate everything. They're not solutions. They're brief respites in a fundamentally unsolvable situation. In 1818, Arthur completed the manuscript. He titled it The World as Will and Representation. 4 books, 50+ chapters, covering metaphysics, epistemology, aesthetics, ethics, everything connected, every piece following logically from the central insight. The will is reality. Consciousness is its instrument. Suffering is inevitable. Relief is temporary. Death ends nothing because the will continues. He was 30 years old and had just written one of the most original works in the history of philosophy. He knew it was brilliant. He expected immediate recognition. The publisher Brockhaus in Leipzig accepted the manuscript. Arthur insisted on high-quality paper and clear typography. This was a major work. It deserved proper presentation. The book appeared in December 1818, backdated to 1819 for commercial reasons. Arthur sent copies to every significant philosopher, every major journal, every intellectual figure he could identify. Then he waited for the acclaim. Silence. Weeks passed, months. A few short reviews appeared, polite but uncomprehending. No one seemed to grasp what he'd done. The idealists ignored it because it contradicted their systems. The materialists dismissed it as metaphysical speculation. The general educated public had no interest in a book claiming life was essentially suffering. Arthur was stunned. This was supposed to be his vindication, proof that abandoning commerce for philosophy had been correct. Instead, the book vanished without impact. The first printing sold poorly. Brockhaus eventually pulped the unsold copies. Johanna's reaction was worse than indifference. She read portions and mocked them. Too gloomy, too negative. Who wants to read philosophy that says existence is pointless suffering? Her own novels were selling well. She'd found her audience. Arthur had found nothing. The failure sent him into crisis. He'd sacrificed everything for this work. The relationship with his mother was destroyed. He had no friends, no community, just the certainty that he'd seen through to the truth and the growing realization that no one cared. But Arthur Schopenhauer was not built to give up. The world had rejected his book. Fine, he would make the world listen. If German academia wouldn't recognize genius, he would force recognition through sheer persistence. He would become a professor, deliver lectures, build a following. In 1820, he qualified as a lecturer at the University of Berlin. This required submitting a thesis and defending it publicly. He passed easily. Now he could offer courses and collect fees from attending students. He scheduled his lectures in direct competition with Hegel. Same day, same time. It was academic suicide. Hegel was at the peak of his fame. Students packed his hall to hear about absolute spirit and dialectical synthesis. Arthur's classroom remained empty. Sometimes 1 or 2 students appeared, often none. He would arrive, prepared to lecture on the world, as will, and find himself alone in the room. The humiliation was total. Berlin's academic establishment watched with satisfaction as this arrogant young philosopher discovered that genius without political skill meant nothing. Hegel's students occasionally wandered past Arthur's empty classroom, smirking. After one semester, Arthur gave up. He never lectured again. The university failure destroyed something in him. He'd believed that truth would win through sheer force of clarity, present the ideas properly, and intelligent people would recognize their validity. Berlin proved otherwise. Academic philosophy was about networks, schools of thought, political maneuvering. Hegel dominated because he'd built an empire of disciples who promoted his system and attacked rivals. Arthur had only his book and his contempt for anyone who disagreed with him. He left Berlin in 1822, bitter and isolated. For the next several years he travelled restlessly across Europe. Italy again, Switzerland, Munich, Dresden. He had money. His father's inheritance provided income enough to live comfortably without employment. So he moved from city to city, living in hotels and rented rooms, writing, reading, refining his ideas. In 1831, cholera swept through Berlin. The epidemic was devastating. Thousands died, including Hegel, who succumbed in November. Arthur was back in Berlin when the outbreak started. He fled immediately to Frankfurt, driven by terror of infection. Some saw this as cowardice. Arthur saw it as rational self-preservation. Why stay in a plague city? The will to live demanded escape. Frankfurt became his permanent home. He settled into a routine that would remain unchanged for the next 27 years. Second-floor apartment on Schöne Aussicht Street. View of the River Main. One servant to manage the household. Minimal furniture, everything functional. Books everywhere, stacked on tables, shelves overflowing. The routine was rigid, almost pathological. Wake at 7. No coffee, he believed it damaged the nerves. Light breakfast. Writing until noon, standing at a tall desk. Flute practice for exactly 1 hour. Lunch at the Englischer Hof Hotel. Same table every day. Afternoon walk, precisely 2 hours, regardless of weather. Reading until evening. Dinner, often at the hotel again. Sleep by 10. He walked the same route daily. Through the streets, along the river, back through the old town. Always alone. He carried a walking stick and wore the same style of clothing year after year. Dark coat, high collar, deliberately old-fashioned. People recognized him. The eccentric philosopher who talked to no one, except he did talk to one companion. He kept a poodle named Atma, Sanskrit for world soul. The name was a joke, though Arthur's jokes were never funny to anyone but himself. The dog was his primary relationship. He spoke to it constantly during walks, full conversations. When Atma died, he got another poodle and named it Atma again. Then another. His misanthropy deepened into something clinical. He avoided human contact whenever possible. Conversations irritated him. Other people's opinions were uniformly stupid, their concerns trivial. He ate alone, walked alone, worked alone. The servant was instructed to minimize interaction. Visitors were not welcome. Women particularly enraged him. He'd never married, never had a sustained romantic relationship. His views on women were vicious even by 19th century standards. He wrote that women were childlike, incapable of genuine rationality, suited only for reproduction. Their entire existence was dictated by the sexual will. They deceived men through beauty, trapping them into marriage and children, perpetuating the cycle of suffering. Where did this come from? Partly from his mother, obviously. Johanna's coldness, her mockery, her preference for Adele, all left scars, but it went deeper. Arthur saw sexual attraction as the will's cruelest trick. People believe they're in love, that they've found someone special. Actually, they're being manipulated by biological drives. The species needs reproduction. The will creates desire, romantic illusion, obsession. People destroy their lives chasing these feelings, then wonder why marriage brings misery instead of fulfillment. In 1821, an incident occurred that would haunt him legally for years. Arthur was living in Berlin in an apartment building. His neighbour was a seamstress named Caroline Marquet, middle-aged, working class. She and some other women were talking loudly outside his door one afternoon. Arthur was trying to work. He'd complained about noise before. This time he physically pushed Caroline away from his doorway. She fell down the stairs. Caroline sued. She claimed permanent injury to her arm and demanded compensation. The case dragged through Prussian courts for 5 years. Eventually, Arthur was ordered to pay her a quarterly pension for life. He was furious. He believed she'd exaggerated the injury, that the whole thing was fraud. He paid the pension for 20 years, resenting every payment. When Caroline finally died in 1842, Arthur wrote in his account book, Obit anus, abit onus. The old woman dies, the burden is lifted. Latin, because cruelty in Latin sounds more philosophical. This was Arthur Schopenhauer at 40, 50, 60, alone in Frankfurt, convinced of his genius, ignored by the world, bitter about everything, but he never stopped working. If no one would listen to his lectures, he'd write more books. If the world as will and representation hadn't found its audience, he'd make the ideas more accessible. In 1836, he published On the Will in Nature, a shorter work connecting his philosophy to recent scientific discoveries. He showed how biology, physiology, even linguistics supported his central claim. The will operates unconsciously through all life. Plant growth, animal instinct, human desire, all expressions of the same blind force. Reception remained minimal. A few scientists noticed. Most philosophers ignored it. Hegel's idealism still dominated German universities. Arthur's materialism and pessimism had no place in that world. In 1839, the Royal Norwegian Scientific Society announced an essay competition. Question: is the freedom of the human will demonstrable from self-consciousness? Arthur submitted an essay arguing no. We feel free because we're conscious of our desires but unconscious of what causes those desires. The will determines everything. We're spectators to our own lives, believing we're in control. He won the prize. Finally, recognition. It was a minor academic prize from a Scandinavian society, but Arthur treated it as vindication. He'd been right all along. The world was slowly catching up. Encouraged, he submitted another essay to the Royal Danish Society the next year. Topic: the foundation of morality. Arthur argued that morality isn't based on reason or divine command, but on compassion, the direct experience of others' suffering as our own. This temporarily breaks through the illusion of individual separateness and reveals the underlying unity of the will. The Danish society rejected his essay. They found his tone arrogant and his criticisms of other philosophers excessive. Arthur had spent half the essay attacking Kant, Fichte, and especially Hegel. The judges considered this inappropriate. Arthur exploded with rage. He published the essay himself with a bitter preface attacking the Danish society, questioning their competence, suggesting corruption. This did not win him friends. Throughout the 1840s, he worked on a massive expansion of his original book. If people hadn't understood the world as will and representation the first time, he'd explain it more thoroughly. He wrote 50 additional chapters, more than doubling the book's length, clarifications, elaborations, responses to imagined objections. The second edition appeared in 1844, 2 volumes now. Arthur was 56. The book sold slightly better than the first edition, meaning it barely sold at all. Reviews remained sparse and uncomprehending. He began to accept that fame would not come during his productive years, maybe after death. History would recognize what his contemporaries could not. He started arranging his papers, writing prefaces for posthumous publication, planning his legacy. His health declined. Chronic breathing problems, possibly asthma, heart palpitations. He became convinced he'd die soon and obsessed over his will, changing it repeatedly. The money would go to a fund for wounded Prussian soldiers, not from patriotism. He despised nationalism. But soldiers had suffered, and alleviating suffering was the only moral act. Then something unexpected happened. Europe in 1848 exploded in revolution. France, Germany, Austria, Italy. Monarchies shook. Barricades went up. Workers demanded rights. Liberals demanded constitutions. It was chaos. Arthur watched from Frankfurt with horror. He hated revolution, hated democracy, hated the idea that common people should have political power. When fighting broke out in Frankfurt, he offered his opera glasses to Prussian soldiers so they could aim better at revolutionaries. When the revolution was suppressed, he was relieved. His political views were straightforward. Strong authority prevents chaos. Human nature is fundamentally evil, driven by selfish will. Democracy unleashes this. Better to have order imposed from above. He admired the military, not for glory, but for discipline. Anything that restrained the will's destructive impulses was valuable. But the revolutions had an unexpected effect on philosophy. The old certainties were collapsing. Hegel's rational historical progress seemed absurd when streets filled with blood. Optimistic idealism felt disconnected from reality. People started looking for philosophies that acknowledged suffering, conflict, the darkness in human nature. In 1851, Arthur published a new book. Not systematic philosophy this time, but essays, shorter, more accessible pieces on practical topics. He called it Parerga and Paralipomena, Greek for appendices and omissions, things left out of the main work, supplementary thoughts. The book covered everything: chapters on education, women, noise, reading, reputation, suicide, character. Written in clear German, no technical jargon. Aphoristic, sharp, often funny, in a caustic way. The essay on noise is characteristic. Arthur despised unnecessary sound, especially whip cracking. He wrote pages condemning this practice, calling it barbaric, demanding legal prohibition. The intensity is absurd, but also weirdly compelling. This book succeeded where the others had failed. Not immediately, but gradually. Copies sold, readers passed it along. The essays got quoted. Younger intellectuals discovered them and went looking for the earlier work. By 1854, Arthur was receiving letters from admirers. Students at universities were reading him. Journals were publishing articles about his philosophy. He was 66 years old. He'd been waiting for this his entire adult life. The fame grew steadily through the 1850s. Dissertations were written on his work. Professors began teaching him. His books went into new editions, actually selling this time. Visitors started appearing in Frankfurt, asking to meet the great philosopher. Arthur was delighted and suspicious. Where had these people been 30 years ago? Why did they ignore him when the ideas were fresh? But he accepted the recognition. He'd been right to persist. Genius eventually wins. He gave some interviews, always at his apartment, always controlling the conversation. He'd sit in his chair, the visitor across from him, Atma on the floor. He'd answer questions, deliver pronouncements, accept praise. His bitterness softened slightly. Not much, but slightly. Wagner visited. The composer was developing his own philosophy of music and found Arthur's aesthetics useful. They disagreed on details but respected each other. Wagner later incorporated Schopenhauerian themes into his operas, especially the idea of redemption through renunciation. Young philosophers made pilgrimages. Some became disciples, spreading his ideas. Others simply wanted to meet the man who'd written that suffering was the fundamental reality and somehow made it philosophically rigorous. His daily routine never changed. Still, the same walks, same meals, same rigid schedule. But now people recognised him on the street. The eccentric with the poodle was actually famous. In 1859, the third edition of The World, as Will and Representation appeared. It sold out quickly. Publishers wanted more books, translators wanted foreign editions. After 40 years of obscurity, Arthur Schopenhauer was finally acknowledged as a major philosopher. He had 1 year left to enjoy it. Arthur woke on September 21st, 1860, following his precise morning routine. Coffee, newspaper, then the walk with Atma. He was 72 years old, finally recognised, finally vindicated. The morning seemed ordinary. When he returned, he felt unwell. Difficulty breathing, chest pain. He sat in his chair trying to calm himself. His doctor was summoned. Pulmonary failure, the diagnosis. There was nothing to be done. He died that afternoon, sitting upright in his chair, Atma at his feet. No dramatic last words were recorded. No philosophical pronouncement. Just the quiet shutdown of a body that had carried a relentless mind for 7 decades. The man who'd written thousands of pages about suffering and death experienced both without ceremony. His funeral was small. A few colleagues, some admirers, the necessary officials. He was buried in Frankfurt's main cemetery, under a simple stone bearing only his name and dates. No epitaph, no grand statement. The will specified this: let the work speak. And the work did speak, louder after his death than during most of his life. Within a decade, Schopenhauer was everywhere in European intellectual culture. His influence spread through philosophy, literature, music, psychology. Ideas he developed in isolation became foundational for entire movements. Nietzsche discovered Schopenhauer in 1865, 5 years after Arthur's death. He was 21, studying philology at Leipzig, browsing a used bookshop. He picked up The World as Will and Representation on impulse, took it home, read all night. He later wrote that Schopenhauer spoke to him like a personal letter, addressing exactly his own doubts and questions. Nietzsche absorbed everything: the denial of rationality's supremacy, the primacy of will over intellect, the critique of optimistic progress, the focus on suffering as reality's core truth. For years, Nietzsche was a devoted Schopenhauerian, evangelizing the philosophy to friends. But Nietzsche couldn't stay a disciple. His temperament demanded rebellion. Gradually, he inverted Schopenhauer's conclusions while keeping the framework. Yes, life is suffering. Yes, the will is blind and terrible. But instead of denying the will, affirm it, embrace it. Say yes to existence despite its horror. Turn pessimism into a challenge rather than a retreat. Thus spoke Zarathustra, Nietzsche's masterpiece, is unthinkable without Schopenhauer. The eternal recurrence, the will to power, the Übermensch, all these emerge from wrestling with Schopenhauerian pessimism and refusing its conclusion. Thomas Hardy read Schopenhauer and found philosophical justification for the tragic vision already present in his novels. Tess of the D'Urbervilles and Jude the Obscure depict a universe indifferent to human suffering, where noble characters are crushed by blind forces. Pure Schopenhauer translated into Victorian England. Leo Tolstoy encountered the philosophy during his spiritual crisis in the 1870s. He'd achieved everything: literary fame, wealth, family, and felt empty, suicidal. Schopenhauer's analysis of desire's futility resonated completely. Tolstoy eventually moved past pessimism toward Christian mysticism, but the detour through Schopenhauerian despair was necessary. Thomas Mann's novels, especially Buddenbrooks and The Magic Mountain, are saturated with Schopenhauerian themes: decline, exhaustion, the appeal of death, the conflict between artistic sensitivity and vital energy. Mann called Schopenhauer the philosopher of his generation. In France, Guy de Maupassant absorbed the pessimism. His short stories present human nature as driven by petty, selfish impulses disguised as noble motives. Scratch any romantic gesture and find calculation, or instinct beneath. The will operating through social masks. Proust read Schopenhauer carefully. In Search of Lost Time explores how memory and art offer escape from time and suffering. The novel's climax, where involuntary memory delivers the narrator from despair, is essentially Schopenhauerian aesthetics expanded into 3,000 pages. Even optimists had to respond. Pragmatists like William James acknowledged Schopenhauer's challenge. Yes, suffering exists. Yes, life is hard. But pragmatism offered an American answer. Focus on what works, on solving problems, on action, rather than metaphysical despair. Freud never acknowledged the debt, but it's obvious. The unconscious as the primary driver of behavior. Consciousness as a thin surface over dark depths. Sexuality as a fundamental force shaping all human activity. The death drive. These are Schopenhauerian ideas given clinical terminology and therapeutic application. Carl Jung was more explicit. He praised Schopenhauer as a predecessor who understood that consciousness doesn't control the psyche. The collective unconscious, the archetypes, the shadow, all these concepts have roots in the idea that beneath individual awareness lies something vast, impersonal, and powerful. The Vienna Secession and Art Nouveau movements embraced Schopenhauerian aesthetics. Gustav Klimt's paintings, especially the later symbolic works, depict the tension between beauty and death, desire and dissolution. The ornate surfaces barely contain darker truths beneath. Composers continued finding inspiration. Mahler's symphonies explore suffering, transcendence, and the terror of existence with Schopenhauerian intensity. Richard Strauss wrote tone poems that dramatized the will's movements, but the strongest musical legacy came through Wagner to film. When cinema developed, directors discovered that Wagner's music perfectly suited dramatic narrative. And Wagner's operatic philosophy was deeply Schopenhauerian, music as the direct expression of will, bypassing concepts to hit emotion immediately. Every film score in the Romantic tradition, every use of leitmotifs, every orchestral swell accompanying a dramatic moment, traces back through Wagner to Schopenhauer's aesthetics. In early 20th century philosophy, the Vienna Circle and logical positivists rejected metaphysics entirely. Schopenhauer's system was exactly the kind of unprovable speculation they wanted to eliminate. But even in rejection, they were responding to him, defining themselves against his approach. Existentialists found him more useful. Camus' philosophy of the absurd, life is meaningless, but we must imagine Sisyphus happy, is Schopenhauerian pessimism, with existentialist defiance added. We can't escape suffering's reality, but we can choose our attitude toward it. Heidegger, though he rarely cited Schopenhauer directly, shared the focus on being rather than knowing, on existence's fundamental questions rather than epistemology's technical puzzles. In psychology, cognitive behavioral therapy emerged partly as a response to the kind of thinking Schopenhauer described. Our thoughts create suffering. We can't change reality, but we can change our relationship to it. This is resignation reformulated as therapeutic technique. Meanwhile, Buddhism was becoming known in the West and everyone noticed the parallels. Schopenhauer had intuited or reconstructed Buddhist insights using Western philosophy. This made him a bridge figure, helping Europeans understand Eastern thought. The pessimism also influenced political movements, though not how Arthur would have wanted. Some socialists used his critique of capitalism's endless desire creation. Others noted his analysis of how the powerful rationalize exploitation. But mostly, his politics were ignored. The metaphysics, the aesthetics, the psychology, these lived on. The reactionary politics were abandoned as products of his era and temperament. By the mid-20th century, Schopenhauer had become part of the philosophical canon. Not the most discussed, not central like Kant or Hegel, but established. University courses covered him, Scholarly books analysed his arguments. New translations appeared. The academic reception was mixed. Analytic philosophers found his arguments imprecise, his metaphysics outdated. They wanted logical rigour and empirical grounding. Schopenhauer offered neither. Continental philosophers were more sympathetic. His influence on phenomenology, existentialism, and critical theory was undeniable, even when unacknowledged. In popular culture, his pessimism resonated during certain periods and disappeared during others. The anxious 1890s loved him. The optimistic 1920s ignored him. The disillusioned post-World War II period rediscovered him. The prosperous 1990s forgot him again. This pattern reveals something. Schopenhauer speaks to disillusionment. When optimism fails, when progress seems stalled, when meaning feels absent, his philosophy offers explanation and odd comfort. You're not crazy for suffering. Suffering is the default. Now what? Contemporary philosophers still argue about him. Some defend the metaphysics, claiming the will is a genuine insight into reality's nature. Others treat him as a brilliant psychologist who mistook psychological observations for metaphysical truths. The aesthetic theory remains influential in philosophy of art. The idea that art provides temporary escape from selfhood, that beauty offers respite from desire, that music is fundamentally different from other arts. These claims still generate discussion and disagreement. His ethics are less influential. The compassion-based morality feels underdeveloped compared to utilitarian or Kantian alternatives. But the critique of egoism, the insistence that we're not as rational as we think, the exposure of self-serving motivations, this remains valuable. In self-help and popular philosophy, Schopenhauer appears frequently, usually unattributed. Any advice about reducing desires, accepting what you can't change, or finding peace through resignation has Schopenhauerian roots. Stoicism's recent popularity in Silicon Valley and self-improvement circles is partly Schopenhauer returning in Roman clothing. Marcus Aurelius and Epictetus are more optimistic, but the basic move, control your reaction since you can't control events, is shared. Buddhist-influenced mindfulness practices in Western psychology are another vector. John Kabat-Zinn didn't cite Schopenhauer when developing MBSR, but the philosophical groundwork was there, prepared by a grumpy German who read badly translated Sanskrit texts in the 1810s. The question remains, was he right about metaphysics? Probably not. The will as thing in itself is unprovable and unfalsifiable. It's a poetic idea masquerading as metaphysics. Neuroscience and evolutionary biology offer better explanations for human behavior than a cosmic blind will. About psychology? Substantially, yes. We overestimate our rationality. Unconscious drives shape us more than we admit. Desire creates suffering. Satisfaction is fleeting. These observations hold up. About aesthetics? Partially. Art does provide distinctive experiences, different from ordinary perception. Whether this constitutes escape from will is debatable, but Schopenhauer identified something real about aesthetic experience. About ethics, mixed. Compassion is important, but his account of why we should be compassionate is unconvincing. Seeing through individuation to recognize shared identity sounds profound, but doesn't generate clear moral obligations. About pessimism, this is where debate gets interesting. Is life more suffering than pleasure? Schopenhauer thought this was obvious. Critics argue he generalized from his own miserable temperament. But maybe the question is wrong. Perhaps life isn't primarily about pleasure versus suffering. Perhaps meaning, connection, growth, creativity matter more than hedonic balance. Schopenhauer, focused on desire and satisfaction, might have missed what makes life valuable. Still, anyone who's experienced depression recognizes his descriptions. The exhaustion, the sense that nothing matters, the awareness that achieving goals doesn't bring lasting happiness. He mapped that territory accurately. His ultimate legacy might be this: he forced philosophy to take suffering seriously. Before him, Western philosophy was dominated by rationalism and optimism. After him, darker truths became philosophically respectable. You could trace a line from Schopenhauer through Nietzsche to existentialism to postmodernism. Each movement builds on his insight that Enlightenment rationality doesn't have all the answers, that beneath civilization's surface lie forces we don't control and truths we'd rather not face. Modern pessimist philosophers like David Benatar, author of Better Never to Have Been, explicitly cite Schopenhauer. Antinatalism, the view that creating new life is ethically wrong because existence contains unavoidable suffering, is Schopenhauerian pessimism taken to its logical extreme. Environmental philosophy sometimes uses his framework. Nature isn't harmonious, it's brutal competition, everything consuming everything else. Romantic nature worship ignores reality. This harsh view can motivate conservation. We should protect nature despite its cruelty, not because of imagined harmony. In technology criticism, his analysis of desire applies perfectly to consumer culture and social media. Endless wanting, temporary satisfaction, new wanting. The hedonic treadmill he described has been mechanized and accelerated. Arthur Schopenhauer died convinced he'd been right about everything, finally vindicated after decades of neglect. The truth is more complex. He was right about some things, wrong about others, and brilliantly insightful in ways he didn't intend. He wanted to be remembered as the philosopher who solved reality's riddle. Instead, he's remembered as the philosopher who articulated suffering's reality and offered one possible response: resignation without hope, but also without despair. Whether that response is adequate remains an open question, one each person must answer alone. Friedrich Nietzsche encountered Schopenhauer's work in a Leipzig bookshop in 1865, and it detonated in his mind like a philosophical bomb. He was 21, studying classical philology, drifting without clear direction. Then he opened The World as Will and Representation. For weeks he barely slept. He read obsessively, underlining passages, writing exclamations in margins. Finally, a philosopher who didn't pretend life was rational or good, who acknowledged the chaos underneath, who spoke truth regardless of whether it comforted anyone. Nietzsche would later say that Schopenhauer educated him, though not in the way a student accepts a teacher's doctrine. More like how a fighter learns by sparring with a master. You absorb the techniques, then develop your own style. Eventually, you might surpass your teacher entirely. The relationship between these two thinkers defines a crucial transition in Western philosophy. Schopenhauer diagnosed the problem: life is suffering caused by blind will. Nietzsche accepted the diagnosis but rejected the prescription. Resignation? Denial of will? Absolutely not. That's just another form of weakness. What if we said yes instead? Their philosophical differences map onto deeper temperamental opposites. Schopenhauer was rigid, systematic, pessimistic, seeking escape from existence. Nietzsche was fluid, experimental, ultimately life-affirming despite recognizing its horrors. He wanted transformation, not transcendence. But we're getting ahead. First, we need to understand who Nietzsche was before philosophy consumed him. Born October 15th, 1844, in Rücken, a tiny village in Prussia. His father was a Lutheran pastor, his mother the daughter of a pastor. The family was devoutly religious, respectably middle class, conventional in every way. When Friedrich was 4, his father died of a brain illness, horrible, lingering, involving seizures and progressive mental deterioration. The boy watched his father become someone else, someone broken. A year later, his younger brother died. The family, now Friedrich, his mother, his sister Elizabeth, and various aunts, moved to Naumburg. He grew up surrounded by women in a house of mourning and piety. His mother called him "my little pastor." Everyone assumed he'd follow his father into the ministry. He was serious, studious, well-behaved. Other children called him the little minister, not affectionately. At 14, he won admission to Schopenhauer, an elite boarding school with a brutal classical curriculum. Latin, Greek, ancient history, theology, all day, every day. Students who couldn't keep up were expelled. It was intellectual boot camp, designed to produce scholars and civil servants for Prussia's expanding bureaucracy. Nietzsche excelled. He discovered he had a gift for ancient languages, particularly Greek. Homer, the tragedians, the pre-Socratic philosophers, these became more real to him than contemporary Germany. He started writing poetry and musical compositions, dark romantic stuff influenced by Byron and Hölderlin. His health was already problematic. Terrible headaches that would last days, digestive problems, eye strain that made reading painful. Doctors diagnosed various things, prescribed various treatments. Nothing helped much. He'd struggle with illness his entire life. Though whether the physical problems caused his philosophy or the philosophy caused psychosomatic symptoms remains debated. In 1864, he enrolled at the University of Bonn to study theology and philology. Within a semester, he'd abandoned theology. He could no longer believe. The historical critical study of the Bible, which treated scripture as human document rather than divine revelation, had destroyed his faith. His mother was devastated. Her little pastor had become an atheist. He transferred to Leipzig to study exclusively philology under Friedrich Ritschl, the most respected classicist in Germany. Ritschl immediately recognized Nietzsche's brilliance. Here was a student who didn't just translate ancient texts, but inhabited them, understood the culture that produced them. Then came the encounter in the bookshop. Schopenhauer's philosophy gave Nietzsche a framework for understanding everything he'd been feeling. The pointlessness of conventional existence, the lies people tell themselves, the suffering underneath respectable surfaces. But Nietzsche added a new element. He met Richard Wagner. Wagner in 1868 was Germany's most famous living composer, controversial and charismatic. He was also a Schopenhauerian who'd read The World as Will and Representation and decided his music dramas were the artistic redemption Schopenhauer described. Nietzsche, introduced through mutual friends, was invited to Wagner's home. The composer was 55, the student 24. They bonded instantly. Wagner found an intellectual disciple who understood his artistic vision. Nietzsche found a living embodiment of genius, someone who'd actually created great art despite the world's mediocrity. For several years, Nietzsche practically worshipped Wagner. He visited Tribschen, Wagner's estate in Switzerland, repeatedly. He spent holidays there, played piano duets with the maestro, discussed Schopenhauer late into the night. Wagner's wife, Cosima, treated him like a younger brother. Meanwhile, his academic career was proceeding unusually. At 24, before finishing his doctorate, he was offered a professorship at the University of Basel in Switzerland. Ritschl had recommended him so strongly that Basel waived the doctoral requirement. They just awarded him the PhD based on published articles. Suddenly Nietzsche was Professor Nietzsche, the youngest philology professor in Europe, lecturing on Greek grammar and metrics to Swiss students who mostly found him difficult and abstract. He was supposed to produce conventional scholarship, critical editions, textual analysis, the usual academic work. Instead, he started thinking dangerous thoughts about Greek tragedy. His first book, The Birth of Tragedy from the Spirit of Music, published in 1872, was unlike anything in classical philology. It argued that Greek tragedy emerged from the tension between two artistic impulses, which Nietzsche called the Apollonian and the Dionysian. The Apollonian represents order, rationality, beautiful form, individual identity. Think of a perfectly proportioned statue, serene and timeless. Apollo is the god of light, clarity, measure. The Dionysian represents chaos, intoxication, dissolution of boundaries, unity with nature's terrible power. Think of a frenzied religious dance where individual identity melts away. Dionysus is the god of wine, madness, ecstatic ritual. Greek tragedy, Nietzsche argued, balanced these forces. The Apollonian form, structured verse, mythological plots contained Dionysian content, the suffering and horror of existence. The result was art that acknowledged life's terrible truth while making it bearable through beauty. Then Socrates ruined everything. With his demand for rational explanations, his contempt for myth and intuition, his equation of knowledge with virtue, Socrates killed tragedy. After him came philosophical dialogue and rational drama. The Dionysian element was suppressed. Western culture became increasingly Apollonian, increasingly committed to reason and order, increasingly unable to face truth. The book was dedicated to Wagner, who loved it. Everyone else in academic philology hated it. It wasn't proper scholarship. It was speculation, poetry, cultural criticism. Ulrich von Wilamowitz-Mühlendorf, a rising star in classical studies, published a devastating review calling it amateurish nonsense. Nietzsche's academic reputation never recovered. His lectures attracted fewer students each semester. The University of Basel tolerated him, but his career was effectively over. He was 30 years old. His health was deteriorating. The headaches were becoming unbearable. His eyesight was so bad he could barely read. He took a medical leave repeatedly. He tried various cures, special diets, cold water treatments, different climates. Nothing worked. In 1876, he attended the opening of Wagner's Bayreuth Festival, the culmination of the composer's dream, a theatre designed specifically for performing his operas. Nietzsche had supported the project for years. He expected transcendence. Instead, he was disgusted. The audience was German high society, there to be seen rather than experience art. Wagner was courting exactly the cultural establishment Nietzsche despised. The music dramas, which Nietzsche had seen as Dionysian redemption, now seemed grandiose and empty. Worse, Wagner was embracing Christianity. Parsifal, his final opera, was about Christian redemption. For Nietzsche, who'd rejected Christianity as life-denying, this was betrayal. Wagner was becoming what Schopenhauer had been, a pessimist seeking escape. The break wasn't immediate or explicit. Nietzsche simply stopped visiting. The friendship faded into polite distance, then silence, then hostility. Later, Nietzsche would write viciously about Wagner, attacking him as a decadent, a symptom of cultural decay. But losing Wagner freed Nietzsche. He no longer needed to reconcile his developing philosophy with someone else's artistic vision. He could think independently. In 1879, at age 34, his health collapsed completely. He resigned his professorship. Basel granted him a modest pension. He became a wanderer, moving between cheap boarding houses in Switzerland, Italy, and southern France, seeking climates that might ease his suffering. He had no job, no permanent home, no family. His mother and sister lived in Germany, and he avoided them. No close friends after the Wagner break. He was alone, sick, poor, unknown, writing books almost nobody read. This was when he produced his greatest work. Human All Too Human appeared in 1878, a collection of aphorisms marking his break from Schopenhauer and Wagner. No more metaphysics of will, no more aesthetic redemption, just psychological observation of human behaviour, culture, morality. The aphoristic style became his signature. Short, sharp observations rather than systematic arguments. Philosophy done with a hammer, breaking apart comfortable assumptions. Daybreak followed in 1881, attacking Christian morality as slave revolt against life. Then the gay science in 1882, where the famous line first appears, "God is dead." People misunderstand that phrase. Nietzsche didn't mean God never existed, or that atheism is new. He meant that European culture had killed God through enlightenment, rationality, and scientific progress, but hadn't yet realized what this means. We've removed the foundation of our values, but we're still living as if the foundation were there. The consequences haven't hit yet. And what are the consequences if there's no God, no transcendent order, no objective morality? Then everything we've believed is revealed as human construction. Our values, our meanings, our purposes, all invented. This is simultaneously terrifying and liberating. Most people, Nietzsche thought, can't handle this. They'll retreat into comfortable lies, new religions, secular ideologies that function like religions, anything to avoid facing the void. This is nihilism, the recognition that existence has no inherent meaning. But nihilism isn't Nietzsche's conclusion. It's the crisis his philosophy addresses. The question is, what comes after God's death? Do we despair, or do we create new values? In 1883 he began Thus Spoke Zarathustra, his strangest and most ambitious work. Written in biblical pastiche, it tells of a prophet who descends from mountain solitude to teach humanity about the Overman. The Overman, often mistranslated as Superman, which sounds like comic books, is Nietzsche's answer to nihilism. Not a biological superior being, but a type of human who creates their own values, who says yes to existence despite its suffering, who transforms rather than transcends. Zarathustra teaches eternal recurrence. Imagine you had to live your exact life again, infinite times. Every pain, every boredom, every failure, repeated forever. Could you bear it? Could you want it? Only the Overman could affirm this ultimate yes. The book sold almost no copies. Nietzsche paid for publication himself. Reviews were scarce and confused. His isolation was complete. He kept writing, Beyond Good and Evil in 1886, systematically dismantling traditional morality. On the Genealogy of Morals in 1887, tracing how Christian values emerged from resentment and weakness. His health worsened. The headaches were constant. He vomited regularly. He took enormous doses of chloral hydrate to sleep, which probably damaged him further. He could work only a few hours daily, writing in notebooks with terrible handwriting. Yet his thinking was reaching its peak. Everything was coming together. The critique of Christianity, the revaluation of values, the philosophy of power, the eternal recurrence. He was preparing his masterwork, the revaluation of all values. Then in January 1889, something happened in Turin. He was walking through the Piazza Carlo Alberto when he saw a coachman beating a horse. Nietzsche ran forward, threw his arms around the animal's neck, and collapsed. They carried him to his lodgings. He was conscious but incoherent, alternating between weeping and mad laughter. He wrote letters signed Dionysus or the Crucified. He claimed to be various historical figures. The brilliant philosophical mind was gone. His friend Franz Overbeck rushed from Basel, found him in a state of complete breakdown, and brought him back to a clinic. The diagnosis was unclear. Tertiary syphilis, some doctors said, though the evidence is disputed. Progressive paralysis, dementia. Whatever the medical term, the result was the same. Friedrich Nietzsche, at 44 years old, had lost his mind. His mother took him to her home in Naumburg. For the next 11 years he lived in twilight. Sometimes he was calm, sitting quietly. Other times he was agitated, shouting incomprehensibly. He recognized no one. He had no awareness of who he'd been or what he'd written. The man who challenged the foundations of Western thought was reduced to a vegetative existence. His mother cared for him until her death in 1897. Then his sister, Elizabeth, took over. And this is where the story becomes darkest, in a different way. Elizabeth Förster Nietzsche was a nationalist an anti-Semite, married to Bernhard Förster, who'd founded a failed Aryan colony in Paraguay. Nietzsche had despised her politics, calling anti-Semitism a mendacious swindle and breaking with her over it. But now he was helpless, and she controlled his legacy. She took his unpublished manuscripts and began editing them, not just organizing, but altering, cutting, rearranging. She compiled a book called The Will to Power from his notebooks, presenting it as his systematic magnum opus. But Nietzsche had abandoned that project. The fragments she used were notes he'd rejected or reconsidered. She removed passages criticizing German nationalism. She emphasized selections that could be read as supporting her ideology. She essentially invented a Nietzsche who matched her politics. When he died in 1900, she staged his funeral as a nationalist spectacle. She built an archive in Weimar, positioning herself as guardian and interpreter of his philosophy. When the Nazis came to power, they embraced this version of Nietzsche. Hitler visited the archive. Elizabeth gave him Nietzsche's walking stick. Photos show the Führer staring thoughtfully at the bust of the philosopher. The Nazis quoted Nietzsche constantly. The Overman became the Aryan Superman. The will to power became justification for conquest. The critique of slave morality became anti-Christian and anti-Semitic propaganda. This is the Nietzsche most people knew for decades. Philosopher of fascism, prophet of Nazi ideology, but it was a lie, a deliberate distortion. The real Nietzsche had attacked German nationalism as a sickness. He'd praised Jewish intellectual contributions to European culture. He'd written that anti-Semites should be expelled from Germany. His concept of power wasn't about military domination, but self-overcoming, psychological strength, creative achievement. The Overman wasn't a racial type, but a philosophical ideal. After World War II, scholars began recovering the actual texts, undoing Elizabeth's corruptions. The complete notebooks were published. The fake will to power was exposed. Slowly, painstakingly, the real Nietzsche emerged. But the damage was done. Even today, mention Nietzsche, and many people think Nazis. So what did he actually teach? Strip away the distortions and misreadings, what's left? Start with his critique of morality. Nietzsche argued that what we call good and evil aren't eternal truths but historical inventions. He traced two types. Master morality, created by the strong, celebrates power, nobility, pride, life affirmation. Whatever enhances power is good. Weakness is bad. This was the morality of ancient aristocrats, of Homer's heroes. Slave morality, created by the weak, inverts these values. The powerless can't compete physically, so they win through moral revolution. They declare that strength is evil, that humility is virtuous, that suffering is redemptive. The meek shall inherit the earth, the last shall be first. This is Christianity, which Nietzsche saw as slave morality's greatest triumph. It convinced the powerful to feel guilty for their strength, to value weakness, to deny life in favor of an imaginary afterlife. Neither morality is true in any absolute sense. They're tools, strategies, expressions of different types of life. But slave morality won in the West, and the result is what Nietzsche called nihilism. We've built our entire civilization on Christian values, but we no longer believe the Christian metaphysics that justified them. God is dead, but we're still acting as if he weren't. We value compassion, equality, humility, without any foundation for why we should. The floor has dropped out beneath our feet, and we haven't noticed yet. When we do notice, what happens? Some people will despair. If nothing means anything, why not give up? Others will create substitute gods, political ideologies, scientific progress, consumerism, anything to fill the void. Nietzsche called these last men people who blink and say, "We have invented happiness," while living comfortable, meaningless lives. But there's another possibility. We could create new values consciously, without needing cosmic backing. We could affirm life as it is, not as we wish it were. This requires tremendous strength, honesty, courage, the ability to look at existence, painful, meaningless, eternal, and say yes, this is the overman, not a future biological evolution, but a psychological type, a human who has overcome the human, who creates rather than accepts values, who transforms suffering into achievement. The will to power is Nietzsche's fundamental principle, but not what people assume. It's not about dominating others. It's the basic drive of all living things to grow, expand, create, overcome resistance. A plant pushing through concrete embodies will to power. An artist struggling with a canvas embodies it. It's life itself, the force that opposes entropy and decay. Everything that lives seeks to enhance its power. Moralities are expressions of this. Master morality is strong life celebrating itself. Slave morality is weak life trying to survive through cunning. Neither is true or false, but one is healthier, more life-affirming. Eternal recurrence is Nietzsche's thought experiment and test. Imagine a demon tells you that you'll live your exact life infinite times. Every moment, every choice, every suffering, repeated forever with no variation. Could you accept this? Most people would be horrified. Their lives are filled with regret, resentment, wishing things had been different. But the overman would embrace it, not despite suffering, but including it, because suffering is necessary for achievement. You can't have mountains without valleys. To love life means loving all of it. This isn't optimism. Nietzsche wasn't claiming life is good in any conventional sense. He acknowledged that existence is brutal, unfair, filled with pain, but he rejected the response of denying or escaping it. Christianity says this world is fallen, the real world is heaven. Buddhism says existence is suffering, seek nirvana. Schopenhauer says life is endless striving, resign yourself. Nietzsche says stop lying, face what is, and then say yes anyway. The revaluation of all values means questioning everything we've inherited. Not to be contrarian, but to be honest. Do we value humility because it's genuinely good, or because it serves certain interests? Do we condemn pride because it's wrong, or because it threatens equality? Strip away the moral language and look at what values actually do, what forms of life they promote or suppress. This is dangerous thinking. Without absolute morality, doesn't everything become permitted? Isn't Nietzsche opening the door to tyranny and cruelty? He addressed this concern, though not in ways everyone finds satisfying. He distinguished between strong and weak cruelty. Weak cruelty is resentment, the pleasure of making others suffer because you suffer. This is slave morality's revenge. Strong cruelty is hardness toward oneself first, the discipline required for achievement. The sculptor who destroys 1,000 attempts to achieve one great work. But there's tension here, no question. When you remove objective morality, you're trusting individuals to create wisely. Nietzsche admitted most people couldn't handle this freedom. They need moral systems, need to be told what to do. The overman is rare, maybe only a few per century. Everyone else requires structure. Critics have pounced on this. Isn't this elitism? Isn't this exactly the kind of hierarchy that justifies oppression? Nietzsche wouldn't have denied the elitism. He explicitly rejected equality as a value. People aren't equal in talent, strength, intelligence, creativity. Pretending otherwise is dishonest. But his hierarchy wasn't racial or hereditary. It was based on psychological and spiritual achievement. Anyone potentially could become an overman through the right struggle and development. His influence on 20th century thought is impossible to overstate. Existentialists like Sartre and Camus grappled with his nihilism and his call for authentic existence. Postmodernists like Foucault and Derrida extended his critique of truth and objective meaning. Psychologists from Freud to Jung to evolutionary psychologists draw on his insights about unconscious drives and the role of power in behavior. His writing style revolutionized philosophy. Before Nietzsche, philosophy meant systematic argumentation. After him, it could be aphorisms, poetry, narrative, whatever form suited the thought. He showed that how you write is part of what you're saying. His prose is explosive, poetic, designed to provoke and disturb rather than merely convince. Artists and writers claimed him as inspiration. Yeats wrote about the dissolution of certainty. Rilke explored the necessity of suffering for creation. Thomas Mann built novels around Nietzschean themes of decline and affirmation. Even popular culture absorbed his ideas, often distorted but recognizable. Every time someone talks about creating your own meaning or becoming your best self, there's Nietzsche's shadow. But the misunderstandings persist. The overman isn't a ruthless egoist trampling others. The will to power isn't mere aggression. Eternal recurrence isn't literal cosmology, but psychological test. And Nietzsche himself wasn't advocating specific political programs. He was diagnosing cultural conditions and proposing philosophical responses. What would he make of our current world? The question is impossible but tempting. He'd probably see the last man everywhere, comfortable, distracted, consuming entertainment, avoiding difficulty, medicating every discomfort. He'd see nihilism disguised as tolerance, where we're not supposed to judge anything because nothing really matters. He'd see slave morality triumphant, with victimhood as currency and resentment as politics. But he'd also maybe see possibilities. The internet's democratization of knowledge, the breakdown of traditional authorities, the forced honesty about life's meaninglessness in a secular age, the raw material for revaluation. His personal life remains heartbreaking. All that brilliance, all that courage to think forbidden thoughts, and it ended with him drooling and unaware in his sister's house while she perverted his legacy. The final 11 years were a kind of death worse than death consciousness, extinguished while the body persisted. Yet something survived. Not what Elizabeth tried to create, but the actual words, the real philosophy. Once scholars recovered the genuine texts, Nietzsche's thought proved resilient. It survived the Nazi association. It survived academic dismissal. It survived being reduced to slogans. Because ultimately, he asked questions we can't escape. If there's no God, where do values come from? If existence has no inherent meaning, how should we live? If suffering is unavoidable, can we affirm it rather than just endure it? If truth is perspective, does anything remain solid? These aren't abstract puzzles. They're the actual conditions of modern life. The man who collapsed embracing a horse spent his sane years embracing existence itself, demanding we face reality without comforting lies. His reward was madness, distortion, and association with the worst crimes of the 20th century. But his challenge remains. God is dead, he announced. We killed him. Now what? The silence after that question stretches across decades. What comes after God's death? What did come after? We know now. We lived through the answer. The 20th century tried everything. Fascism said the strong should rule and the weak should perish. Communism said history has a direction and we're the ones to push it there. Liberal democracy said individual rights and market forces will sort it out. Each was a response to the void Nietzsche identified. Each claimed to have found solid ground after the earthquake. Nietzsche would have despised all of them, not because he had a better political system, but because he knew politics couldn't solve the problem. The problem wasn't how to organize society, it was how to create meaning in a universe that offers none. How to affirm existence when existence doesn't care whether you affirm it or not. His philosophy wasn't a program, it was a mirror. Look at yourself honestly, strip away the comfortable lies, see the resentment you call justice, see the weakness you call virtue, see the fear you call morality. Then if you can bear it, create something new. Not by following rules, but by becoming who you actually are. This is why he remains dangerous. Not dangerous like a weapon that can be aimed at enemies. Dangerous like a truth you can't unlearn once you've seen it. Read Nietzsche seriously, and you can't go back to simple answers. You can't pretend morality is obvious, or that your values are universal, or that meaning is just sitting there, waiting to be discovered. The cost of honesty is permanent discomfort. That's what he offered. No system, no solution, just the demand that you face reality without flinching. His madness raises one final question nobody can answer. Was the collapse coincidental? Or did thinking thoughts that extreme, that honest, that corrosive to every comfortable assumption actually break something in his mind? Did he see too much? Probably not. The syphilis explanation is almost certainly correct. The timing, the symptoms, the progression, all fit. His madness was biological accident, not philosophical consequence, but the timing feels cruel in a way that invites metaphor. He spent 10 years writing about affirmation and strength, and creating values beyond good and evil. And then his mind shattered, and he spent 11 years as helpless as an infant. If there's a lesson there, it's not the one his sister wanted. It's not that his philosophy was wrong or led to his destruction. It's that existence doesn't care about your philosophy. The universe won't reward you for courage or punish you for cowardice. There's no cosmic justice, no balance, no meaning except what you create. And even that can be taken away by a spirochete bacterium too small to see. That's the ultimate test of affirmation. Can you say yes to a life that might end with you drooling and unaware while your sister betrays everything you believed? Nietzsche said yes. Whether he would have maintained that yes if he'd known what was coming, we can't know. But he wrote the philosophy before the collapse, and the philosophy stands. His influence grows stranger with distance. Contemporary philosophers don't call themselves Nietzscheans, the way they might call themselves Kantians or utilitarians. His thought resists systematization, but his questions permeate everything. Postmodernism's skepticism about truth and objectivity, that's Nietzsche. Existentialism's focus on authentic choice and self-creation, that's Nietzsche. Psychology's recognition of unconscious motives and the role of power in relationships, that's Nietzsche. Even people who've never read a word of his philosophy live in the world his thinking helped create. The idea that you should create your own values rather than accept inherited ones. The suspicion that moral judgments often disguise self-interest. The recognition that suffering can be meaningful if you choose to embrace it. These aren't just philosophical positions anymore. They're assumptions built into modern consciousness, but so are the distortions. Every time someone justifies cruelty by claiming strength, every time someone confuses the will to power with the desire to dominate, every time someone treats Nietzsche as a prophet of selfishness, the actual philosophy gets buried under caricature. Here's what he actually said, stripped of Nazi propaganda and pop culture distortion. Life is suffering. There's no escaping that. But suffering doesn't have to be meaningless. If you can affirm it, choose it, see it as necessary for creation and growth, then it becomes something other than just pain to endure. Morality, as we know it, often comes from weakness and resentment disguised as virtue. Real virtue would mean creating values from strength, from overflow, from joy rather than from fear and spite. Truth isn't absolute but perspectival. Every viewpoint is limited, but that doesn't mean all perspectives are equal. Some are more life-affirming, more honest, more conducive to human flourishing. The goal isn't to find the one true perspective, but to develop the strength to hold multiple perspectives and create meaning anyway. God's death wasn't something Nietzsche celebrated. It was a diagnosis. European civilization had organized itself around Christianity for over 1,000 years. Now that foundation was crumbling. The Enlightenment had killed God with reason and science. But Enlightenment thinkers still tried to keep Christian morality without its theological justification. Nietzsche saw that this couldn't work. If God is dead, Christian morality dies too. Not because we should be cruel or selfish, but because the entire framework of sin and redemption and universal moral law loses its foundation. What replaces it? That was the question his entire philosophy tried to answer. Not with a new system, but with a new type of human. The overman isn't a specific person or a political program. It's a possibility. The human who can create values without needing them validated by God or reason or universal law, who can say yes to existence despite and because of its hardness, who can dance rather than just endure. Most of us won't become overmen. Nietzsche knew that. He wasn't writing for everyone. He was writing for the rare individuals capable of that kind of self-overcoming. For everyone else, he offered at least the possibility of honesty. Stop pretending your resentments are justice. Stop calling your weaknesses virtues. Stop hiding behind moral systems that let you feel superior while accomplishing nothing. Even if you can't create new values, at least see the old values for what they are. Human creations, not divine commands. Useful fictions, not eternal truths. Tools that served a purpose in their time, but might not serve our purposes now. The eternal recurrence thought experiment remains his most powerful tool. If you had to live your exact life again, infinitely, every pain and humiliation and loss repeated forever, could you bear it? Could you want it? Most people's honest answer is no. There are things they desperately want to change, decisions they regret, suffering they do anything to avoid. Nietzsche's point wasn't that recurrence is literally true. It was that your answer reveals whether you're truly affirming life or just enduring it. If you can't say yes to your life as it is, including all the worst moments, then you're not affirming existence. You're negotiating with it, trying to get a better deal. Real affirmation means no negotiation. This life, exactly as it is, again and again, forever. Yes, not because it's pleasant, but because it's yours. Not despite the suffering, but including it, seeing it as necessary, as the price and the fuel for everything you've created and become. That's an almost impossible standard. Nietzsche knew it. He might not have met it himself. But setting an impossible standard serves a purpose. It shows you how far you are from genuine affirmation, how much of your life you're still resenting, still wishing was different, still refusing to embrace. The paradox of his legacy is that a man who valued strength and health above almost everything spent his final decade helpless and insane. A man who preached self-overcoming and becoming who you are had his work perverted by his sister into something he would have hated. A man who wanted to dynamite old values and create space for new ones became associated with the most reactionary, murderous ideology of the 20th century. If there's justice in any of this, it's not obvious. But Nietzsche didn't believe in justice. He believed in amor fati, love of fate. Whatever happens, say yes to it. Not because it's good or fair, but because it happened. Because resistance is just another form of weakness, another way of saying the universe should have been different than it was. Could he have said yes to what happened after his collapse? To Elizabeth's betrayals, to the Nazi appropriation, to decades of being misread and misused? We can't know, but the philosophy he left behind says yes anyway. Not because outcomes are good, but because they're real. Because saying no changes nothing except your own capacity for affirmation. His books sit on shelves around the world now. Students encounter them in philosophy classes, often confused, sometimes repelled, occasionally transformed. Beyond good and evil, thus spoke Zarathustra, on the genealogy of morals, the gay science, each one a bomb planted under comfortable certainties. Some readers find liberation, the permission to question everything, to create rather than just accept, to become rather than just be. Others find justification for cruelty or selfishness reading into Nietzsche's words what they wanted to find there all along. Still others find only confusion, unable to reconcile the poetry with the philosophy, the affirmation with the criticism, the joy with the hardness. All of these readings reveal more about the readers than about Nietzsche. That might be exactly what he intended. Philosophy as mirror, not doctrine. Read him and you see yourself, your assumptions, your limitations, your possibilities. The man himself remains elusive. Behind the words is a person we can barely glimpse. Lonely, proud, often physically miserable, sustained by a handful of genuine friendships and a vast internal life. Walking mountain paths for hours, working out thoughts, writing in bursts of inspiration, reading voraciously, composing music nobody would perform, watching Europe slide toward catastrophes he predicted but couldn't prevent. Was he happy? By conventional measures, absolutely not. Sick, poor, isolated, largely ignored during his productive years, then destroyed before his work gained recognition. But by his own measure, perhaps yes. He lived according to his own values. He thought forbidden thoughts and wrote them down. He created rather than merely consuming. He said yes to his fate, at least while he was still capable of saying anything. The horse in Turin becomes his last statement, though he didn't intend it as one, seeing suffering and responding with embrace rather than words, breaking in the act of compassion. There's something fitting about that, though fitting isn't the right word. Existence doesn't fit together into meaning. It just is. And Nietzsche's existence was 11 years of productive brilliance, followed by 11 years of silence. His challenge outlives him by more than a century and shows no signs of fading. God remains dead in the sense that most educated people in the developed world no longer organize their lives around religious belief. We've tried filling the void with politics, with science, with entertainment, with self-help, with social justice, with anything that might provide the meaning religion once offered. None of it quite works, not because these things are worthless, but because they're not designed to bear the weight of ultimate meaning. They're tools, pursuits, values among others. Making them into substitute religions just creates new forms of fanaticism without solving the underlying problem. The problem Nietzsche identified and never solved. If meaning isn't given, if we have to create it ourselves, how do we do that? How do we avoid nihilism on one side and self-deception on the other? How do we affirm existence honestly without pretending it's something other than it is? He didn't have the answer. He had approaches, experiments, thought tools, the overman as goal, eternal recurrence as test, will to power as lens, revaluation of values as project. But no system, no solution, no reassurance that it will work out. Just the demand that we try, that we face reality without comfortable lies, that we create meaning aware that we're creating it, that we say yes to existence, including everything that makes yes difficult. That's what survives the madness and the distortions and the century of misreadings. Not a philosophy you can adopt like a political position. A challenge you can't escape once you've understood it. The universe doesn't care about you. Meaning isn't waiting to be discovered. Suffering won't be justified by some cosmic plan. So what are you going to do about it? Everything Nietzsche predicted came true, just not how he expected. The 20th century did fill the void left by God's death. It filled it with ideologies that promised salvation through politics, through science, through progress. Millions died for these substitute religions. The gas chambers, the gulags, the killing fields, all built by people certain they'd found meaning after God. Would Nietzsche have been surprised? Probably not. He'd warned that most people couldn't handle the freedom of creating their own values. They'd retreat into new forms of the absolute, new certainties to replace the old ones. The last men inventing happiness, while everything burned. But something else happened too, something harder to measure. Individual human beings read his books and changed. Not into overmen necessarily, but into something more honest. They stopped pretending their resentments were justice. They recognized that their suffering wasn't redemptive unless they made it so. They understood that meaning was their responsibility, not the universe's gift. This quieter legacy matters more than the political appropriations. Philosophy doesn't change the world through grand systems. It changes people one at a time, slowly, often invisibly. Someone reads Beyond Good and Evil at 20 and spends the next decade working through its implications. They don't become a Superman. They become slightly more honest about their motivations, slightly more willing to question inherited values, slightly more capable of saying yes to their actual life, rather than the one they wish they had. Multiply that by millions of readers across more than a century, and you get something unmeasurable but real, a shift in how people think about meaning and morality, not a revolution, just a gradual erosion of certainties that needed eroding. The questions remain unanswered because they can't be answered definitively. Each person has to work through them individually. If God is dead, where do my values come from? If suffering is inevitable, can I affirm it? If meaning isn't given, what meaning will I create? There's no correct answer you can look up. There's only your answer, discovered through the specific circumstances of your life. Nietzsche's own answer was cut short by biology. We don't know if he could have maintained his affirmation through old age, through watching his work be distorted, through whatever trials awaited. The madness makes him a strange prophet, silenced at the moment when he should have been able to demonstrate what he preached. But maybe that's appropriate. His philosophy wasn't about arriving at some final state of enlightenment. It was about constant becoming, constant self-overcoming. The process matters more than any end point. He demonstrated the process for as long as his mind allowed. Then the process ended, as all processes eventually do. What's left are the books, not perfect, not complete, often contradictory, sometimes maddening, but alive in a way that systematic philosophy rarely is. Reading Nietzsche still feels dangerous. He still provokes, disturbs, challenges. The prose still crackles with energy and contempt and wild joy. You can disagree with every conclusion and still be changed by the encounter. The ultimate test of a philosopher isn't whether they were right. It's whether they asked questions that remain vital. By that measure, Nietzsche passed absolutely. We're still working through the implications of God's death, still trying to create values without cosmic backing, still struggling to affirm existence honestly, still wondering if strength and compassion can coexist, if we can be hard on ourselves without being cruel to others, if we can say yes to life without lying about what life contains. These questions belong to modernity itself now. They're not Nietzsche's anymore, they're ours. He articulated them with unusual clarity and force, but they arise from the actual conditions of life after religion, after metaphysical certainty, after the comfortable lies have been stripped away. His tragedy was writing for a future that arrived too late for him to see. During his productive years, almost nobody read him. Success came posthumously, filtered through distortions and appropriations he would have hated. By the time scholars recovered his actual philosophy, everyone who'd known him was dead. But the ideas survived, damaged, misused, slowly rehabilitated, but fundamentally resilient. Truth has a way of persisting even when it's been buried under lies. Not because truth is eternal or objective in any metaphysical sense, but because certain insights keep proving useful, keep helping people make sense of their experience, keep offering perspectives that illuminate rather than obscure. Nietzsche illuminated the darkness we all carry, the resentments we call justice, the weaknesses we call virtues, the fear we call morality, the nothing we're terrified to face. He didn't offer escape from darkness, but suggested we might learn to dance in it. Whether that's possible remains an open question. Most people can't do it. Most people need more comfort than honesty allows, more certainty than life provides. They'll keep inventing substitute gods, keep pretending meaning is objective, keep avoiding the void. But some won't. Some will read the books and recognize themselves in the challenge. They'll try to create values consciously, to affirm existence without reservation, to become who they actually are, rather than who they're supposed to be. Most will fail. A few might succeed partially. None will become the overman because the overman is an impossible standard designed to show us how far we have to go. The journey matters anyway. Not because it leads somewhere, but because the alternative is staying where you are, comfortable and dishonest, living what Nietzsche called the unexamined life. Better to struggle toward an impossible goal than to never struggle at all. This is what he left us. Not a solution, but a standard. Not answers, but better questions. Not comfort, but the possibility of honesty. Not meaning, but the responsibility to create it. The man who collapsed embracing a horse, who spent 11 years silent and unaware, who wrote books almost nobody read until after his mind was gone, changed how we think about everything. Not through political power or institutional authority, but through words on pages that keep finding readers who need them. God is dead. We killed him. Nietzsche announced this not as triumph, but as crisis. The question he left behind echoes through every attempt we make to live meaningfully in a universe that doesn't care whether we do or not. Now what? Each of us answers individually, through the choices we make, and the values we create, and the affirmations we manage or fail to manage. There's no collective answer, no solution that works for everyone, no system that resolves the tension. Just the endless work of becoming, of questioning, of creating, of saying yes despite everything that makes yes difficult. That was Nietzsche's challenge. It remains ours. The books are waiting for anyone brave enough or foolish enough to take them seriously. What happens after that depends entirely on the reader.